Welcome to Food for Change, the brand new podcast from the Global FoodBanking Network, where we serve up big ideas, bold innovations, and inspiring action for people and planet. Hosted by Jason Woods from the Global FoodBanking Network, each episode brings together the sharpest minds in hunger relief, food recovery, climate action, and food policy. All food champions who are reducing food waste, improving nutritious food access, and addressing the gaps in our global food systems. Think of this podcast as your weekly serving of inspiration with a side of actionable ideas. Food for Change is made possible thanks to the generous support of Kellanova and HEB. Kellanova strives to provide a delicious choice of brands that people know, trust, and enjoy, and is committed to advancing sustainable and equitable access to food and creating better days for people and planet. HEB grocers and markets strive to be a workspace and shopping environment that is rooted in an unwavering belief that each and every person counts and has donated more than 1 billion pounds of food to neighbors throughout Texas and Mexico. This week on the show, we're digging into methane emissions and climate action. But don't worry, this is still a food podcast. Food banks nourish people, but they're an often unseen solution to nourishing our planet, too. And right now, we need solutions that address both hunger and climate change. We're joined by Carolina Urmeneta, Program Director of Waste and Circular Economy at the Global Methane Hub, and Mariana Jimenez, General Director of the Mexican National Network of Food Banks. Let's dig in.
I'm Jason Woods from the Global FoodBanking Network, and you're listening to Food for Change, serving solutions for people and planet. We are here with Carolina Urmeneta, who is the Director of Waste and Circular Economy Programs at the Global Methane Hub. Carolina, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Jason. I'm happy to be here with you and collaborating always with the Global FoodBanking Network.
Thank you. So we're talking about methane today. Why is methane such a big deal?
Methane is such a big deal because it is a short climate life pollutant, what means that it lasts like around 12 years in the atmosphere, which is very different on what we have with CO2, which lasts around 100 of years, right? And the global warming potential in this 12 years lifetime of the methane is 86 times more than CO2. So the opportunity that we have with methane is that if we cut the emissions in this decade and in the next one, we could have a shift on the temperature increase, right? And that's the opportunity, and that's why we call it our emergency brake, because of the climate crisis, right?
Yeah, that's a really good analogy. Could you explain that a little bit more? What do you mean by cutting methane is an emergency brake?
Oh, because this is like methane is one greenhouse gas, right? Which is relevant and it's included in our inventories, right? Since forever, since the Paris Agreement. The thing is that because the other greenhouse gases like CO2 and others last long time in the atmosphere, and because we are already almost at 1.5 degrees, which was the goal, right? We need to pull some emergency brakes in order to avoid that the temperature continues to rise in the same pathways that is doing now, right? So methane, because it lasts only 12 years, it is a really good opportunity to shut that or to change, to shift that trajectory that we have on the temperature increase.
Yeah, so let's talk about that last opportunity that you're mentioning a little bit more. So you're saying there's a connection between methane and food that's not eaten for whatever reason, what we call food loss and waste. But obviously methane comes from other things as well. So why is now the opportunity to focus on reducing food loss and waste?
It is the opportunity because this is an agenda that is going in parallel and is going to strengthen the agenda on carbon neutrality goals and everything that we are doing, right, with CO2. The thing with food loss and waste is what we are doing now, right, is that we are disposing this food loss and waste, right, like organic waste, into landfills, right, or dumps. And that is generating a lot of methane emissions, right? And what's going on in most of the countries is that the lifetime of the landfills is getting to their end, right? So we need to have a discussion. Do we want to have new landfills, big installations, right? Big size installations with a lot of problems because of climate change, because of the heat waves, right? And the temperature increase again. What's going on in most of the landfills is that they're getting fire because of the operation and because of the methane that we have there. So we need to avoid the methane generation in the landfills, in the dams, etc. What is that is generating that methane? It is organic waste, so food loss and waste, right? So we have a problem which is real, right? Communities are affected, the health is affected, etc. We need to find a solution, and the solution is not new, right? What are we talking here about is food loss and waste prevention, of course, that's the first one, and recovery. And when we talk about recovery, we're talking about, for example, food banks, right? Food donation, feeding animals, etc. And if we cannot do that, we're talking about organic waste management, right? Like composting site facilities, anaerobic digestion with energy generation, etc. With that, you can avoid, right, the organic waste disposal, and that's a solution that we can implement now. Of course, there are some issues, right, that we're going to discuss, but it's not rocket science, right? We don't need to wait for a new research on this, right? We need to implement this.
Absolutely. So, yeah, let's talk about this some more. How do we reduce the amount of methane released into our atmosphere? You mentioned, you alluded to a couple of things we could do, but let's get into it a little bit more.
Yeah, for example, when we talk about prevention and recovery, right? Of course, we could work on campaigns and different things, right, for citizens to change our behavior. But also, we need to consider this type of actions, right, like the recovery, for example, or the reuse, right, of the organic waste as a climate change action, right? And for that, you need to do different things, right? One is first to raise the problem, right? And to understand the problem. Okay, we do have the numbers, right? Methane from the waste sector, right? This organic waste sector is like the methane emissions from the sector are 20% of the emissions, right? The thing is that the solutions are here and they are cost effective. So what is that is missing is that we don't have enough data to make the decisions. It is policies and or it is finance, right? And of course, the commitment, but assuming that we do understand that, right? And that we are working on that, right? On data, we are working, in fact, with the Global FoodBanking Network, with ReFed, and other organizations like WRI, WWF, and others, to provide better and robust data to decision makers, right? And why this is important. Previously, for example, I was the head of climate change at the Ministry of Environment in Chile, right? And we presented our commitment for the Paris Agreement while I was leading, that area. And when we discussed about food loss and waste prevention and recovery, I was like, okay, what is the data that we have available in my country, right? Chile. They were like, oh, this is the information that we have, right, from the public sector and working together with different NGOs and private sector, etc. And it was like, okay, not tons of data. What is the methodology behind this, right? What is the information? How robust is this? Oh, well, we don't have good emission factors. We don't have really good information. Okay, so we are not ready to establish a baseline and then establish a goal, right? Like a target, right? To reduce or to prevent, right? So what we are doing, for example, with the Global FoodBanking Network is, and this is already available, so it is a great news. We have a methodology that is called Food Recovery to Avoid Methane Emissions, the FRAME methodology. Why this is important? Because if you have the data, then you could do the management, right? And then you could set targets, and then you could work on policies. If you don't have the information, it's really hard to do it. Do we need the perfect information? No, we need data to make decisions, right? And as soon as you have that, right, you can start really good discussions, for example, with decision makers or with the Congress, right, on how to promote food donation. What is needed, right? And that's the type of discussions that we are promoting because of this methodology and because of the new and improved data that is available now.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's all very, very interesting and obviously very important. So let's talk a little bit more about the partnership between the Global Methane Hub and the Global Food Banking Network and this FRAME methodology. Could you tell us a little bit more about FRAME?
Yeah, it is a standardized and a scalable methodology to quantify and track food recovery, right? And what it does is that it enables the food banks to access to, or first to present, right? And to have and to manage good information, right? And good data. Based on that, you could do mainly, well, 2 or 3 things, right? One is to improve the food bank's management, right? And to have more efficiency, to work on that, right? The second one is because you have better data, you could, for example, consider these type of activities as a climate action activity, right? And if you do that, right, and if you match this type of, like the interest, the urgency that we have on methane mitigation, and you have the data and saying, oh, look, this is a methane mitigation option, well, you could match the ambition, right? And said, okay, like governments, right? Or subnational governments too, right? Or at provincial level, you could say, okay, here we do have an opportunity. We need to make a decision about these landfills and this waste situation, right? Here we have a solution. How we could reduce the organic waste disposal. Okay, we could work on food donation policies, right? Or public-private partnerships, for example, with big corporations or retail companies, right? And you can also, because you have good data and you have a robust methodology, you could have access to economic instruments to support, for example, corporations' commitments on ESG, right? Environmental, social, and governance, right? And that's a huge opportunity too. So having the data and having the methodology open different doors, right? And then you need to figure it out what is the best door that you want to work with, a country, a region, a city, etc., right? We did some pilots in Mexico and Ecuador. And what happened is that, for example, they increased the food recovery by 20 to 60%, depending on the examples, right? Which is huge, right? And they served a lot more beneficiaries, of course. And what also happened because of this was that, for example, the discussion in Ecuador and in Mexico regarding their new commitments is considering food recovery, right? So that's the type of things that we need to do. Is that enough? No. Because we need to work on the models, right? Like the business models and the economics, right, of this. But it's like we're getting that traction, and that's really interesting. And now we're working in additional countries to promote and to provide the same information, right? We have the methodology, so now we can scale.
Well, Carolina, thank you so much for being with us here today. I have one more question for you. What is one specific change you want to see in the near future for our food systems?
Well, that's a good question because one thing for me and because of what we do, I would love to see methane mitigation, right? In a certain period. So what we are promoting in order to be aligned with our carbon neutrality goal and to be aligned with the Paris Agreement goal, right, is to have at least 35% of methane mitigation in the waste sector by 2030, which sounds almost impossible, right? But we are on an emergency, right? So we need to work on that, right? And the opportunities that we have in sectors like food loss and waste is huge, right? And we can also count what we have here is working. Of course, we need the governments, right? And we need the big corporations too, right? Because we need them to work. But here we're also talking about citizens, right? And we're talking about us, right? Because this is our problem, right? We are the ones that are living like heat waves, right? Or huge, I don't know, periods of rains and droughts then and etc., right? So a lot of climate disasters, right? So we need to figure it out on how to leverage this problem and go to implementation. This is what's going to be COP30, right? We are talking about implementation, right? We're having a lot of discussions, right? And one of the discussions is like a lot of commitments, not a lot of actions. So let's move from the commitments to the action, right? We have that. Now we have the methodology, right? It is great. Use it, but use it to make decisions and to get into the action. That's what we need. So that's my hope, right? To get that methane mitigation. In order to do that, we need to do a lot of things, right? It is not enough, and I want also like to be clear, right? It is really important to have the prevention and recovery, but it's also important to improve the landfills management, right? And that's also something that we can do in parallel, right? We are capable to do that, right? And that's what we are promoting, right? Both things. But we need to think in short term, medium term, and long term. And the long term, right, is okay, we don't want to be in this situation in the next like 10 to 15 years, right? Where again, we are going to have the discussion on landfills are getting to the end of their lifetime. Are we going to do this again? Again, we are going to dispose organic wastes, nutrients, and everything into a hole, right? And not use that. Or we are going to recover that, or to have, a reuse good policy and to use that as fertilizers and other options, right? So that's my big hope and what we are doing together, right? In order to get to this very good, I hope, right? Situation by, I don't know, 2030 to 2040, right? And 2050 is the goal to have carbon neutrality, right?
Carolina Urmeneta, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you.
We're here today with Mariana Jimenez, the General Director of BAMX, the Mexican Food Banking Network. Mariana, it's good to see you. Thank you for your time today.
No, thank you. Thank you, Jason, for the invitation. I'm really excited about this interview.
Yeah, likewise. So you've been a food banker for 19 years. Why do you continue to do this work?
Yes, I'm really passionate about what we do. We are learning so many things every day. I believe as a food banker, you never stop learning. We always learn about a lot of a lot of topics about food insecurity, about social justice, about peace, about climate change, about community centered projects or programs. We learn about compassion. We're always learning, and I believe that in my case specifically, there's so much work that we have to do, especially in my country, to address both food insecurity, climate change, and food losses and waste. So, first, because why I'm still here, because I'm passionate about what we do. Because second of all, because I'm still learning and I have a lot of things to learn about what we are doing. And third, because there are many, many things that we are still capable of doing, that I'm capable of doing to serve both God and my country. through this cost.
So you mentioned climate, you mentioned food loss and waste. I think when people think of food banks, they think of them as organizations that distribute food to people who are facing hunger, which they are, of course, and that's super, super important. But we spoke with Carolina Urmaneta earlier, and we had a conversation about the connection between food that is lost and wasted and the production of methane, which is a potent greenhouse gas. How does BAMX, how do other food banks help mitigate methane emissions?
Well, it's so good that we're talking about this, because for over the years we always spoke about the social impact that food banks have in terms of reducing or addressing food insecurity, and how we are aimed to recover social justice in our countries. But now that we know the environmental impact that the food losses and waste have, and how through our actions of recovery and redistribution food, we are mitigating greenhouse gas emissions, mainly methane, it's so relevant, because now I believe that eyes must be on food banking as a cost-effective way to reduce not only food insecurity and address food losses and waste, but also to contribute to mitigate climate change through methane mitigation.
So how do you demonstrate how much BAMX is contributing to the mitigation of methane?
Last year, we participate with also Food Bank of Ecuador in a pilot phase project alongside with GFN and the Global Methane Hub. And what we did is we participate in the design of the frame methodology, which is food recovery to avoid methane emissions. This methodology allows us to quantify the number of methane the number of methane emissions that we are mitigating through our actions. Through this pilot phase, we preparate all our data recollection ecosystem that allows us to recollect information of our food banks about how many food they're recovering, how many emissions they are mitigating, and also how many emissions they are generating in order to reduce those emissions to the emissions that they are mitigating. And we have great results, because as I said in the last question, what is important for us is to have accurate data about all our processes and all the information that we want to assure that all the information that we recollect from our food banks and that we deliver to our stakeholders, mainly to our GFN network, all these data is accurate.
So you mentioned having accurate data, having detailed information to share with your stakeholders. What's an example of a stakeholder that you might share this information with?
Well, I believe that our donors are very interested of the impact that their donating actions are having, not only to demonstrate to their stakeholders, like their consumers, that they are having a positive impact through food donations in the environment, but also to be very aware that food donating is a cost-effective way for them to reduce food waste, to reduce also food insecurity, and also to reduce methane emissions. I believe that nowadays donors and companies and their stakeholders are very interested on how these companies are impacting communities and how these companies are impacting the planet. So to have this information and to provide them accurate data about their actions and how their actions are impacting communities and the planet is very important. And it can be a new way to attract new donors and to attract new companies, and also to make visible how relevant is food banking as a solution, as a suitable solution for climate change.
Yeah, absolutely. So this work is connected to, or maybe even opens up other opportunities like climate financing or carbon credits. Can you explain to our listeners really briefly what climate financing is in maybe a sentence or two?
That's
If
quite a
possible, if
challenge.
possible.
Yes, I'm going to try to explain that as a nutritionist that I am. I'm not a climate expert, but what climate finance does is quantifies and monetize the environmental impact that food banks have through their actions of recovery and redistribution of food. All this food that we are recollecting and we're redistributing to communities would otherwise go to landfill. And if that would happen, obviously those surpluses will turn out to be greenhouse gases. So what we do is that we quantify how many greenhouse gases we are mitigating and we are avoiding from going to the atmosphere. And we are not only quantifying that impact, but also climate finances to monetize this impact and to get resources, financial resources that in our case are working and are being used to strengthen our capacity to recover more food, to reduce more greenhouse gas emissions, and to feed more people.
Can you give us an example, a specific example of what climate financing might look like for a food bank?
Yeah, I can give you our example. BAMX has incursionated in the carbon market since 2023. We have been quantifying how many carbon emissions we're mitigating or we are avoiding from going to the atmosphere. And since 2023, we have been allocating 3 stocks of carbon credits. These carbon credits are the equivalent of the number of greenhouse gas emissions that we are avoiding. So for instance, on 2023, we avoided more than 100,000 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions from going to the atmosphere. So that's the exact amount that we allocated in the carbon market. It contributes for us to diversify our sources of income, and with those resources, we are strengthening the capacity of our food banks to enable them to recover more food, especially regionally. Our 59 food banks are organized in 9 regions. So what we want to do is strengthen the capacity of each region to recover more food locally.
So how do you strengthen the capacity in these different regions with the financing, the resources you're getting from climate financing?
Yeah, we are looking at 3 main targets. One is to strengthen their logistics capacity, like we need more trucks to recover more food, especially from Mexican field. Second, we need to strengthen their capacity to have larger warehouses. So we need to build more warehouse capacity, and also we need to strengthen cold chain capacity, because sometimes we do not have enough cold chain, especially in the trucks that recover food from the field. And obviously, we want to assure that the most produce is available for human consumption. If we do not have the correct infrastructure, especially with cold chain, maybe we are not able to recover to take advantage of all the food that you're recovering.
So you've been speaking to this, but I wanted to ask in a different way. Why is it important to invest in food banking?
That's a great question because we are always defending food banking and recovery and redistribution as a cost-effective way to reduce, as we were saying, not only food insecurity but also climate change. Because, and I'm going to speak from a personal point of view, because Mexican food banking model is very particular and different from other food banks in the world. Mexican food banks are our operations are financially sustainable because we can ask for a recovery fee, a small recovery fee that covers all the operational costs of our food banks. And when a social investor invests in food banks in Mexico, they know that the impact that they're going to have and that we are going to demonstrate is going to last for at least 10 or 15 years. And I'm going to explain this because if someone invests for instance, in logistic capacity in Mexico by buying us trucks to recover more food, they are going to invest only once in this logistical capacity, and through all the years that the trucks, in all the years that trucks live, for instance, we're going to have enough resources to operate those trucks. So our social investors only invest once to strengthen our logistical capacity, and by the financial sustainable model that we have, we can have enough resources to operate those trucks. So you don't have to be investing every year, or you don't have to be giving us money away for us to operate those trucks. And that is going to be the way that we're going to be delivering social and environmental impact for as long as the truck is available to recover food, So I believe that food banks have a very efficient and sustainable model to recover food, to redistribute this food, and to report this environmental impact to their investors, because we do not have to, they do not have to be investing like every year in the same strategy. They can invest in other strategies while we are reporting social impact with the investing that they do in our food banks.
So speaking about the environmental side of the work of BAMX, what's hard about this work? And alternatively, what's motivating and energizing?
What is hard for us nowadays is to make companies more aware about how to scale their impact in terms of environmental impact through food donation. And actually, as I was saying earlier, with this data that we are now able to give away to our donors, we believe that it's going to be easier for us to make them more aware about the impact that food donation has in terms of environmental impact. Also in Mexico, it has been very challenging to incentivize through tax incentives and through specific policies to incentivize food donation. If we have this information now that we have this information, I believe it's going to be easier for us to uh, to impulse public policies to incentivize more food donations. And the main issue for us is logistics. Mexico, our problem here is Mexico is not about scarcity, but it's about logistics. So that is why climate finance is so important for us, because through that finance, we can strengthen our logistics capacity, which is our main issue here in Mexico, to have enough capacity to recover all the food that is being lost or wasted, especially in the Mexican field.
What excites you about this work, or what encourages you as you think about the future of the climate work that BAMX is doing?
Yeah, it's really exciting. And as I was saying, I'm learning a lot about this. This is so new for us, and it has happening very, very fast. So what excites me is that for BAMX to be if now that BAMX is incursionating in the climate agenda, opens us new doors. It really encourages me and encourage our food banks that were very resistant about food banking being not only a social impact organization, but also an environmental organization. They were very resistant about this, and now they are very motivated to report their data, to recollect data, to be very careful about how efficiently they are using energy. For instance, we have strengthened also our food banks to have solar panels. And that way they're going to reduce the number of emissions that they are generating, because we now know that also has an impact in the environment. So we want to be net zero in our operations. I mean, that the number of emissions that we generate has to be lower than the number of emissions that we mitigate, because we want to provide we want to have a positive impact in the environment.
And one final question, Mariana. What is one specific change you want to see in the near future for our food systems?
Ooh, one specific change is that we want to see, what we dream about is that everybody recognizes the relevance of food banking as a strong, powerful strategy to reduce climate change and hunger in the world.
Mariana Jimenez, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for all of the wonderful work you and BAMX are doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Jason, and thank you, GFN, for all the great work that you are doing.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of Food for Change, serving solutions for people and planet from the Global FoodBanking Network. And a huge thanks to our guests, Carolina Urmeneta and Mariana Jimenez. We also want to say thank you to our sponsors and longtime GFN partners, Kellanova and HEB, for making this show possible. Before you go, take a minute to subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and head to foodbanking.org/foodforchange to see full video episodes and for more ways you can be a Food for Change champion. Join us next week for another serving of inspiration and action, where we'll dig into the global laws and policies that shape food access, waste reduction, and food recovery. See you then.